In the worship order, the title is Cornerstone, but I think it could also have been, Do Not Let Your Hearts Be Troubled. There's something deeply human about Thomas. And I've always felt that Thomas has been treated a little unfairly by history. You know, we remember him as doubting Thomas. But when you actually read the gospel carefully, Thomas is often the one who's willing to ask the difficult questions that everybody else is probably thinking. Earlier in John's gospel, when Jesus decides to return to Judea, even though it may lead to danger, it is Thomas who says to the others, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Not certainty or triumph, but loyalty and faithfulness. And in today's gospel, Jesus is speaking words of comfort when Thomas interrupts him. He says, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way?" It's an honest question. And I think many of us know something about that feeling. How can we know the way when the world is in turmoil? And how can we know the way when relationships have become strained? How can we know the way when communities are changing? And how can we know the way when our bodies are failing us? When grief overwhelms us? When the future no longer seems clear? How can we know the way? And the gospel reading today does not begin with confidence. It begins with that comfort, with Jesus saying to his friends, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." All of us need to hear that sometimes. Our psalm today speaks of fear and exhaustion and grief and isolation. "I am in trouble," says the psalmist. "My life is worn out with sorrow." And yet, right in the middle of that psalm comes a line we recognize because we know that Jesus himself will speak it from the cross. "Into your hands I commend my spirit." Trust. Isaiah gives us that strange and beautiful image of the cornerstone. "See, I am laying in Zion a foundation stone, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone. One who trusts will not panic." It does not say, "One who understands everything will not fail." It does not say, "One who never struggles will not be put to shame." It says, "One who trusts will not panic." And trust is not the same thing as certainty. And maybe that is what Thomas understands better than we sometimes realize. He does not pretend certainty that he does not have. Thomas remains in relationship even while continuing to ask the difficult questions. And then the image shifts again in the reading we heard from 1 Peter. Christ becomes for us the cornerstone, a living stone. And then the image expands outward. You yourselves are being built like living stones into a spiritual house. Not one stone, many stones. And that image reminds me of the old stone houses I have seen in rural Mediterranean places. I think of small Greek islands I've seen with little houses built slowly, stone by stone, over many years, even over generations. And the stones are not all identical. Some are large and some are small. Some are smooth and some are rough. Some have clearly been shaped and worn down a little so they can fit together. And together, they have become something very solid indeed. These days, we often speak of community as though community were simply an identity that we possess. But stones do not become a house because they resemble one another. They become a house because they are joined together. One perfect stone sitting by itself is not much use. It cannot make a wall. It cannot shelter anyone. Its value comes from being joined with others. And that, I think, is much closer to the vision of the church we find in the New Testament. Community is not a category, an identity, or a group of people who resemble us, me. It is built through relationship. It is not a collection of perfect individuals, not people who always agree or who always understand each other. The church is a dwelling of living stones being shaped together into something that can hold and shelter life. And that can sometimes be uncomfortable. Real community is not theoretical. It is ordinary and embodied and occasionally awkward. In community, we learn how to share space with people who are not exactly like us. We discover that other people have habits and preferences and anxieties and sensitivities that we do not always understand. In community, we decide what belongs to everyone, how space is shared, what gets planted in the garden, what gets changed, what gets preserved, who feels welcome, who feels nervous, who speaks easily, who hangs back quietly. And sometimes people become afraid to participate because they think they have not earned the right somehow. They think someone else is more qualified. Someone else knows the traditions better. Someone else belongs more fully. Someone else has the authority. But so often in the life of the church, ministry begins very simply. A person notices that something needs doing. Someone offers help. Someone starts watering plants. Someone puts chairs away. Someone remembers names. Someone welcomes newcomers. Someone quietly checks in on another person after worship. Someone starts making coffee. Someone sings. Someone listens. And over time, these ordinary acts become part of the structure holding others up. Not because the people doing them are perfect, but because they are willing to become part of the dwelling. The church is not built from flawless stones. It is built from living ones. And living things grow and change. They sometimes bump painfully against one another while learning how to fit together. But Christ himself is the one who holds the structure together, the one who gathers rather than scatters, the one who reminds frightened disciples, "You are not abandoned, you are not forgotten. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places, many rooms." Not an area reserved only for the spiritually impressive. Not a house built only for the people who never struggle or doubt or ask difficult questions. Thomas belongs there. Peter belongs there. The frightened disciples of Easter morning belong there. And somehow, by grace, through faith, trust, so do we. Not because we have achieved perfection, but because God continues building a home out of us, stone by stone, person by person, act of care by act of care. And I think perhaps that is part of what it means to say, we are not alone. It does not mean that we are all identical or that we never disagree. It does not mean that we never feel uncertain. We are not alone because we are being held together in something larger than ourselves, a spiritual house, a place of shelter, a communion of imperfect people still learning how to trust, and at the center of it all, the tested stone, the precious cornerstone, the one who says to us even now, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." We are not alone. Thanks be to God.